Well, again, it's good to be with you, and thank you all for coming out this afternoon. Hopefully I can keep you awake. Would you like a little story here before I get on to keep you awake? Well, hello, Ellen, and hello. The Butlers, thank you guys for coming. Little story, young man started playing Monopoly with his grandmother. Anybody here play Monopoly? I don't know if the pastor's here. Maybe it's okay to raise your hand or not. I don't know. But this young man started playing Monopoly. And it was so exciting because he loved to put on his little cap and he'd count out the ones and the fives, the tens and the 20s, and then roll the dice and go and collect 200. Yeah, you have played. Collect that $200, boy, and he would just have so much fun doing that. But then there was a problem, you see, because Grandma would start putting these properties, he'd buy properties and put them, and he had to pay rent. And he just didn't like doing that because pretty soon he's all out of money. And he would get so excited. He'd just get so upset. And Grandma would say, honey, what? Honey, one day you'll understand. Oh, Grandma. Well, that summer he went off to a friend's house, some other town, and he found out that guy played Monopoly. And he said, you got to teach me to play. Well, this guy was a good player, and so he started teaching him. All summer they played. I mean, every single day, day in and day out, all day long into the night. And he got pretty good. And he said, I'm going to go home, I'm going to talk with Grandma, and I'm going to play Grandma. Well, he gets there, he knocks on the door, Grandma opens the door. Grandma, let's play Monopoly. Shot right on past her, runs, gets the closet, opens up, gets the thing out. Come on, we're playing Monopoly, Grandma. Sets it all out, and now there's no fun, man. As they say in Texas, it's just business. And he counts everything up, they roll the dice, and they start going on. And you know how it is, it can go on for hours. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And pretty soon, he's got the edge. He's got a little edge. Little more's coming his way. And he's got Pennsylvania Railroad, Reading Railroad, and all these things, and Boardwalk and Park Place. And all of a sudden, man, he finally, after hours, he wins it. He scoops up the money and says, I got it, Grandma, I beat you. Says, honey, what? Honey, one day you'll understand. What do you mean, Grandma? I got all the railroads, I got all Park Place and Boardwalk and all these, I've got every bit of money, I got it all. Says, honey, when the game is over, it all goes back in the box. Brothers and sisters, it's not long before the game's over. And if the Lord doesn't come soon, well, our game's still going to be over, isn't it? We're going to end up in that place. It's time to get ready. It's time to wake up. I want to talk with you about for a moment. Turn with me, if you would, to Numbers chapter 13. God led the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of sin, out of bondage. And he led them across the Red Sea. The Apostle Paul says they were baptized in the Red Sea. And then he led them to, what's the next thing that follows? You got justification. God takes you out of sin, baptizes you, and then it's time for sanctification. He leads them out through the desert to sanctify them, to change them, to wake them up. And boy, these guys have got just problem after problem after problem. They whine, they complain. God, the water's problem, the food problem, the heat problem, you can't imagine it, but they just griped about everything. God keeps saying, look, I've got a land of milk and honey. It's a wonderful land. Now, you don't have to turn there because you got your fingers in Numbers, but I'm going to read you something the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. It's now these things happen unto them for examples, that they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Are we in that time? Wow, yeah, we sure are. There is absolutely no doubt about it. These folks get up to the borders of the promised land. God says, go in, take over the land. Well, I want to send in spies. So the spies go in. And I can almost picture the young people. They're watching every day. They're looking for the spies. And finally one of them said, Mama, here comes the spies, Mama. And look what they've got, Mama. Look what they've got. 2 guys, 1 pole, and 1 cluster of grapes. Now, how big a cluster of grapes is that? Well, that's kind of like saying, hey, come on over to my house when we're in heaven. Come on over to my house, Ellen, and let's split a grape. We're talking massive. Everything that God had said about this land was true. It was true. Truly a land flowing with milk and honey. And then the spies, they continue to give the good reports about, everything, all the food. It's wonderful. But then you get to a place. In verse 28, nevertheless, terrible words when used in this context. The people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there, or the giants. Verse 31, but the men that we went up with them said, we are not able to go against this people, for they are stronger than we. And verse 33, and there we saw the giants, and in our own sight, we are as grasshoppers. In our own sight, we are as grasshoppers. Who are they looking at? Yeah, they're looking at themselves. I'm looking at you. What are you, 6 foot? 6 foot. They found the bedstead of one of the kings, 13 feet 6 inches tall or long. That's a pretty good sized bed. That's a pretty good sized guy. If I'm standing there and I'm looking at that guy and I'm looking at you, you're a grasshopper. Absolutely no doubt about it. But there's an interesting scenario here, because you see in Isaiah, God says, or Isaiah tells of God, He sits on the circle of the earth, and everybody is like grasshoppers to God. So I would submit to you that had they understood the scenario, had they been sitting on the shoulders of God, when you're on the shoulders of God, there are no giants in the land. But this race, this people, they were belligerent. They didn't care. They didn't want to listen to God. They didn't want to follow God. And God finally says, okay, you want to be sand eaters? Go ahead. So 40 years, sands in their food, sands in their tents, sands in their sandals, sands in their clothes. And they all die off. And now the next generation comes on the scene. And we find that group in Joshua. In Joshua, this time the priests have to step in the water. They actually get their feet wet. Got to show a little more faith now. Get their feet wet. And then God stops the waters. And wow. But they didn't do that before they sent in spies. And these guys, 2 of the spies, they come up onto Rahab's house. Rahab is a prostitute. I've often wondered, why did they go to a prostitute's house? This is God's men. Well, think about it though. Her house is right on the wall, right there, right inside the gate. Good spot where all the men are going in and out all the time. A couple more guys aren't going to be noticed, are they? Not really. So these guys are up there that night. They're on the top of the roof. They're ready to go to sleep. And Rahab, the head mistress, she runs up and says, wait a second, guys, don't go to sleep. I want to talk to you about something. And here in verse 9, she said to the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. Who was this woman? A pagan prostitute. I know that the Lord has given you the land. Then on down, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea. And it goes down and down and down. Verse 11, and as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither was there any more strength in any of us. For the Lord, your God, He is God of heaven above and the earth beneath. A pagan prostitute has got more faith than all the children of Israel. Wow. Now, a little sidelight. Of course, we know the scenario. They gave her the little scarlet cord, because she says, you remember me when you come, because I know you're coming. I know God's given you the victory. So they give her a little scarlet cord. She hangs it out the window on the wall and says, everybody that comes into your household, they will be safe. And praise God, man, she calls every relative she can get her hands on, calls everybody, and she tells them about the situation. We ought to be calling all of our relatives, all of our family, telling them about the situation. Jesus is coming soon, and the walls are coming down, brothers and sisters. And, when that scenario happened, can you imagine? The Bible says that the walls came crashing down so that the people were able to walk right in. I've got to ask you, what happened to Rahab's house? It's on the wall. Her house didn't crumble down. Can you really imagine that? Here is this whole big city, and there's one, I picture in my mind, just one pillar up there with this house and this staircase coming all the way down in that whole city, Rahab's house. And she became the great multi-great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. A prostitute, a pagan prostitute who believed in God. God is able to save you if you commit your life to Him, regardless of what you've done in this life. I had the wonderful opportunity. I was in Wyoming. This guy came to me. He'd been the enforcer for the Aryan Brotherhood for years, killed 5 men, tried to kill his stepfather, and on and on and on. I got to baptize him. He called me up a while ago. He said, Jim, you'll never believe I'm giving a Bible study. And he was so excited, God is well able. My brothers, my sisters, if you come to God and lay it all out to Him. But it's so interesting. I want to call your attention to one thing. Back in Joshua, just to chapter 1. In verse 3, God had told them 40 years before, everywhere the soles of your feet shall tread. You English majors, what tense is that? Thank you. Future tense. I have given you. What tense is that? Past tense. The God of the universe had already been there. He'd already scared these guys half to death. When it says our hearts did melt, in the Hebrew, that's our hearts liquefied. A 13-foot tall giant, how much fighting can he do when he's got a heart of liquid? None. God went in, scared them to death. They had no fight in them. All God's people had to do was just follow after God. Listen to what God said. And God says, go in and possess it. Go in and possess it. My brothers and sisters, God has been talking to His people for so long about going in and possessing the land. God's children 40 years early had stopped the plans of God. I hear people today that say, oh, that's arrogant to think that we can do anything about God's second coming. Don't believe it. Children of Israel stopped God's plans for 40 years before they got into the promised land. Today, God desires us to go into the promised land. Ellen White says we have it within our ability to hasten His coming. Hasten His coming. How? When we invite God into our lives, when we become that vessel that God can trust with the power of the latter rain, the loud cry begins to go everywhere. The people hear the message, and when everybody hears the message, Jesus will come. We have it within our power. Do we really want to go home, or are we happy complaining out here in the desert? Years ago, 1844. We know what happened in 1844, the judgment hour of Earth's history. The culmination of a mighty movement came up on planet Earth. Eventually the Seventh-day Adventist. It's not a church, it's a movement. It's designed by God to share the final message of Earth's history, warn everyone, and to tell everyone about the incredible Jesus Christ. We've got to be so careful. John the Baptist is out there baptizing people, and the whole church is there, right? A big chunk of the church, general conference leadership, everybody, members, they're all there. And John says, whoa, there is one among you today whose shoes I am not worthy to untie. And everybody looks around. Where? The church did not recognize the one they were talking about because they had no relationship. They didn't recognize Jesus Christ standing among them. We have to be so careful, brothers and sisters. We have to be so ready every moment, looking to Jesus, begging for the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives, getting that friendship and relationship with Him. Well, 1844, not long after that. How many of you watch the San Francisco 49ers play once in a while? Again, maybe I don't see the pastor at the moment. Maybe it's okay to raise your hand. What's the name of the 49ers? Where did they get that name?
1849.
Yeah, Gold Rush, right? The Gold Rush, the 49ers, man, that group going out there. And Seventh-day Adventists at that time, or at least the movement, they weren't immune to it. They weren't immune to seeking after the gold and rushing after the gold and rushing after these things. I don't think it is happenstance that the message of the last church on Earth's history is Laodicea. Those who are rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing. And what is the counsel of God? Buy of me gold, try it in the fire. Don't run after the gold in California. Don't run after the gold on planet Earth. But buy of me a different kind of gold. The gold you're seeking after is going to be the paving stones of the streets of the city. Don't run after that. Run after the kind of gold that I will give you, an experience in me that is beyond anything. Now, the Adventists at that time, too, they were beginning to have some troubles, doctrinal issues. They were looking at things, state of the dead and the Sabbath truth and all these things. And by the way, you remember the gunfight at OK Corral in Wyatt Earp? That was in 1881. Sometimes we don't think of these things as being synonymous and around these times, Well, before this, of course, now you had the Civil War. That all happened at that time, and in 1881, and Wyatt Earp is going on, all these things. By 1888, church leadership is beginning to fight with one another. They're beginning to have real problems because God is trying to bring back the message, virtually the very message I shared with you this morning. Righteousness by faith. Not only justification, but sanctification. And you had Jones and Wagner bringing this up. And G.I. Butler, who is the General Conference president, he is the theological guardian of the church. He doesn't want anything going on in his denomination like this because, man, we are justification and we're for preaching the law. We ought to have that. But God says there is more to the gospel. We need the whole gospel. And they're fighting back and forth. Uriah Smith gets into the act. He's the Review and Herald editor. And he starts firing salvos now, and they're bad-mouthing Jones and Wagner, and Ellen White's on Jones and Wagner's side at this time. And Jones and Wagner now, they're out in California, and they're the oh, come on, I can do this. Forgot. Which are they? They're the Signs of the Times. Signs of the Times editors. So they launch salvos back to the East Coast. And the East Coast, they do their theological salvos and they launch them out to the West Coast. And Ellen White, writing from Bern, Switzerland about this time, says, guys, cut it out. Don't, my words, don't air the laundry before the brethren in the world. Quit it. They didn't really stop, though. They kind of kept on going a lot of these things, and it just kind of went on and on and on. In 1887, Ellen White wrote that formalism is creeping into the work. She called for revival. She says, there are persons of the church who are not converted. Well, that's not any news today, is it? But then Jones and Wagner especially came up with Daniel 7, that Daniel 7 was the Alemanni and not the Huns. It got so bad around this time, a conference of 1888, when the ministers are walking down the hallway, said, are you a Hun or are you an Alemanni? Tensions were just really running nasty amongst the ministers of God's people. And J. Harvey Kellogg, J. Harvey, his work had grown so big, Ellen White is saying, cut down Battle Creek. Don't have it as large as you have it. Do this here and do this there so that it spreads the work out. He didn't want to listen to that. He was growing and growing, and he virtually wanted to take over the denomination. And he had more workers than the church had pastors. Huge, huge work. Now, the three most powerful people of the denomination at that time, G.I. Butler, General Conference President, J. Harvey Kellogg, and Ellen White. So things are going around, round and round and round. And according to White, at this time, now righteousness by faith was a very big topic along with the others. And this is what she said about the conference at that time. The spirit and influence of the ministers generally who have come to this meeting is to disregard light. Here's another quote. Our ministering brethren are here only to shut out the Spirit of God from the people. One more, opposition rather than investigation is the order of the day. This is the church leadership at the time. Wow. And Ellen White continues to talk about these things, but they realize that while Ellen White's here, they really can't have their own way. So they send the prophet to the other side of the world. Get rid of her. Send her to Australia. Now, she says that God did not want that to happen. God was not happy with that scenario, but he allowed the people to do and the leadership to do what they wanted to do. I've got to ask you, think about this. If you were God's prophet, if I was God's prophet, wouldn't it be just a little bit tempting to say, don't you know who I am? I'm the prophet for planet Earth. How dare you want to send me someplace else? It's not God's will. Wouldn't you be just tempted a little bit? But she didn't do that. Very humble lady. Says, okay. She got on a ship, traveled for 6 months to Australia. She was there sick for 10 months. But then she wrote, Desire of Ages, Steps to Christ, Christ Object Lessons, many books. God did bless, but it wasn't His perfect will. Listen to what she said at one point. The Lord was not in our leaving America. He did not reveal that it was His will that I should leave Battle Creek. The Lord did not plan this, but He let you all move after your own imaginings. The Lord would have had us remain in America. We were needed in the heart of the work, and had your spiritual perception discerned the true situation, you would never have consented to the movement made. There was so great a willingness to have us leave that the Lord permitted this thing to take place. See, God has His perfect will and His permissive will. Those who were weary of the testimonies borne were left without the person who bore them. Our separation from Battle Creek was to let men have their own will and way. Had you stood in the right position, the move would have not been made at that time. The Lord would have worked for Australia by other means, and a strong influence would have been held at Battle Creek, the great heart of the work. It was not the Lord who devised this matter. When we left, relief was felt by many. When God's prophet left, what happened? Relief. We don't have to listen to God's word anymore. Oh, wow. The Lord was displeased, for He had set us to stand at the wheels of the moving machinery in Battle Creek. Now, J. Harvey Kellogg, you remember, he starts writing this book on pantheism. He's going to write that. Ellen White was opposed to that. So just a little note. He gets that out and he finds the Review and Herald Publishing Association will go ahead and publish it because they're publishing anything they can make a dime on. They're hungering after the money. So they've got everything set, ready to print. And you know what happened? Fire. Fire hit that place. And listen, someplace I've got it written here about what the, where was it? What one of the, I can't find it. Goes to show you, you never know. Get this time of day, even I get sleepy. But the fireman said, you Adventists, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire when we're putting water on it. Why? Because it was God's fire. It was God's fire. God burnt the place to the ground, burnt the plates to the ground. Now at the same time, Ellen White, she's in Australia, and W.W. Prescott is preaching in Australia. He has had such a rebirth experience with Jesus Christ. He's getting extremely excited. He's put together the most magnificent meetings. It's touching the heart of A.G. Daniels, who will then shortly in 1901 become the new General Conference president, the longest serving for 22 years. But he's just enamored with the message of Jesus Christ that Prescott is talking about, and so is Ellen White. She writes to the General Conference, says, brethren, please allow us to keep Prescott here to do more meetings in Australia, because camp meeting, there's thousands and thousands of people coming to hear his messages. He's powerful. General Conference wrote back, no. Still bad blood going on. And then you arrive at the point of she comes home just before 1901 for the General Conference session in 1901. In a moment, I'm going to share a video with you. And let me just give you a real quick background on this, because to me, it's amazing how God worked in this. Basically, I have the great privilege of being part of the Revival and Reformation Committee at the General Conference that Elder Wilson appointed now a little over 5 years ago. We had decided we wanted to get away and have a weekend just to pray and see where God wanted to lead and have some study. Well, so we were at another location, and on Friday, we had spent all day on Friday there, and Elder Ron Clousset was with us. We'd invited him to preach the Sabbath morning message. We didn't want a lot of messages, but we wanted that one. So he came. By Friday night, he said, I threw my message away that I was going to preach on Sabbath because I knew after spending all the time with you guys, this is not what God wanted. On Sabbath morning, he gets up and he begins preaching, and he mentions the word 1901. I leaned over to my wife and said, honey, he's going to talk about what might have been. Now, he touched on it, but he didn't go in any depth. But all of a sudden at that moment, I'm thinking, we need to film this. We need to do a video about this so God's people will see it and understand it. Sat down at lunchtime with GC Communication fellow there and Elder Costa. I said, we need to do a movie on this. Well, he said, write a script. I said, I don't want to write a script unless Elder Wilson likes it. Well, Elder Wilson's walking by the table just that moment. I jump up, start telling him about it. He said, write a script. So I left instead of Sunday. We went home Saturday night late, and I'm thinking about all these things. I start writing a little bit Saturday night, get up Sunday morning about 3:30 in the morning, begin writing, wrote till 2 in the afternoon, sent it to Elder Wilson. 2 hours later, he writes back and says, do it. Get together with communications on Monday. So I get together on Monday. Williams Costa said, we don't have the time or anything to do this. We can't do it. And I said, well, no problem. The fellow that I do a lot of videography with, we can deal with it. Now, some of you may or may not know how long it takes the church to work. It just takes a while to process things. When I used to be out in the business world, sometimes, it's driven me crazy how slowly it seems like things work in my narrow mind. But in this case, they said, well, okay. And so I'm flying out. This is Monday. I'm flying out to California, and I get there Thursday afternoon, and I've got a text on my phone. And it says, you've got a green light to go ahead and get it done and a fully approved budget in 4 days. I go, wow, this is absolutely amazing stuff. And so we only had this was just before Christmas, and we had to have this thing shot and done and in the can and back to the GC by February 5 to put in all the languages to send out all over the world for the 100 days of prayer and then for session. God did it. God did it. There are things that happened that I'd love to share with you, but during the filming, we were in tears. There were others in tears. It was pretty amazing to see the hand of God in this. So I'm not going to spend much more time talking. I'd like to show you the video now. And what I've told the fellows, I've given them permission to please make copies of this so that if you take this part of the talk, you'll also get a DVD with it, because I think it's integral to what we're doing. And so, fellas, if you go ahead and kill all the lights, and let's run that and see what you think.